I've been teaching for 15 years, and I'm fortunate as a U.S. history teacher that tomorrow I'm going to go off on a sojourn to the past, and we're going to be going to the Deep South for 10 days, because when one looks at the state standards, you mention civil rights, there's not a lot of depth there, The textbook, it's the same thing, you kind of hit a couple of highlights, but there's no real depth, there's no real understanding. It's kind of a soundbite history, it's small bits of history that are easy to digest. Dr. King makes the I Have a Dream speech, everybody can feel good about that. But you won't get anything about Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who was the hero of Birmingham. John Lewis might be mentioned. However, other players like Reverend Clark Olson would never be mentioned in a U.S. history textbook. The McNair family and their loss, they are not mentioned. Like Vernon Dahmer, who is just this heroic man who is absolutely nowhere in these textbooks. There's always the infamous picture of Elizabeth. You don't really learn anything about her. You don't learn the struggle that she went through. And of course, they might mention the Little Rock Nine, but one of the folks that we spent a lot of time with on the trip is Minnie Jean Brown Trickey, and she is never in the history books. She is not mentioned. All this is unknown history, and it's not easy for all of us to face that. That's the history of this country.
10 seconds. Okay, here we go. Tommy Lewis, if you come over here. This side, you have 30 seconds. Begin. Hey guys.
The struggle, segregation, discrimination, coming out of slavery, and the problems that we've had being accepted into the total society as first-class citizens, particularly here in the South, is not documented in the history books as far as I've seen.
Some of the social problems we have are really only going to be solved when we look at ourselves. And that's a real key here. That's what this whole trip is going to be. You're looking at us. We're looking at ourselves when you go on this trip. This is a scary, scary trip. It's going to be so hard for you.
If you go into like Brooklyn or the Bronx or any of those public schools, you'll see that they're very segregated. And I guess that was the whole debate with the Brown versus Board of Ed. Are we really an integrated society? And I think it was clear from that debate that we're just as segregated as we are in the 60s.
Every freaking year I gotta go through the whole, some student comes up to me, you bombed Pearl Harbor. It's just, that kind of, I hate to say that I'm used to it because that makes it sound like I've accepted it. I thought that, America as a people were beyond that point, but obviously we're not, Even now, I've got it from teachers and stuff. I was in an English class one time in middle school, and it was just friendly banter back and forth between the teacher and me, We got a little heated argument and stuff, and he goes, just remember who won the war. And no, at that time, I was, just a stupid middle school kid, I just, kind of brushed off my shoulder, like, oh, okay, But then I, got to thinking about, like, what, why does he have to even, bring that up?
My name is Mr. Steinberg. I take high school students into the deep south of this country, retracing the civil rights movement of the 1950s, 1960s. You meet people who had relatives who were murdered fighting for freedom. If you choose to come with us, you meet people who are beaten fighting for equality. Any questions? Allison, Stephanie, Daniel, ladies and gentlemen, look at the thing at the bottom. Bravo, I need John Lewis questions if we have them, or the mini Gene assignment. Let me share with you, I only want to do this one time. Rules. If a boy steps his foot into a girl's room, or a girl steps her foot into a boy's room on this trip, you will be on the next flagpole. Cannot go into each other's rooms. Questions about that? There are no drugs or alcohol on this trip. If you are doing drugs or drinking or anything like that, you're subject to be arrested. We don't want to call the police, bail you out. Don't want to do that. One-way ticket home the next day is $1,800. Sojourn will not pay for it. Next one, there's obviously no smoking on this trip. You may not smoke. There are no cell phones. There are no Walkman, MP3 players. You may not sag on this trip. We will ask you one time not to sag. Your parents need to be pulled up on this trip. Women, you need to be appropriate on top and on bottom. That means your shirts, and I don't want to be the shirt police. Arm above your head, your shirt's staying down below your waist. Even though I know they don't make shirts that fit women. I understand that. If you sleep as we are teaching, I'm gently going to go up to you and say, "Excuse me, Whoopi, I need to keep you back." And nobody paid all this money to come on this trip to stay on a bus and sleep. So you need to stay awake. You can help each other do that by elbows to the ribs if you see your friend drifting. Do whatever you can to help them stay awake. Questions about that? Those are the rules. I think they're all really fair. And of course I do. I told you I made them up.
I can recall my mother used to take me downtown to, get my school clothes or whatever. And we had to go in the basement, what we call Pizzitz's bargain basement. We weren't allowed, as blacks, we weren't allowed up on the upper floors. We weren't allowed to drink out of the fountains. I recall one time we caught the city transit bus, and I remember my mother leading me by my hand, paying her fare through the front door and then exiting the bus, going to the back door and getting on board, where we were cramped like sardines in a can. And the front half of the bus, or should I say 3/4 of the way of the bus, was fairly empty. So, those memories are still vivid.
One side of my family is Jewish and the other side is Russian. My dad told me that my grandpa's family was all shot in front of his eyes. But I mean, the people who done it are, dead already also. I mean, and their grandchildren, they have nothing to do with it. Because people look at me, they don't know my history. They don't know where I'm coming from, the fact that my family was from Russia, once you're white, they automatically think, you're white, you're American, or whatever. They have the whole mentality of Americans being white. And so, therefore, they assume that you were involved. Therefore, they assume that that's the way you think. They used to have, all those stereotypes as others. And it's just the color that makes you feel kind of guilty. That you look the same way that the people in those documentaries and movies look like, who were doing those things.
White students have no guilt in this. This is not about guilt for anybody. I want to be really clear here. As we go through this, it's about understanding. It's about knowing the history, where we're at today. But our students, and I want to be really clear here, every white student in here has no guilt nor shame in any of the stuff we are discussing. But it's going to be certainly a different way to think than you might be used to.
And we don't deal with it that much because what happens is it's painful for black people and shameful for white people, so we just kind of put it under the rug and don't deal with it. The only way healing can take place is to take it from under the rug and put it on the table and deal with it.
Please don't carry the burden of your culture group on your back. It's way too heavy, okay? Like, one of the things that sometimes happens is saying, well, I'm defending my group. It's way too heavy to carry. We're not asking you to do that. You cannot speak for an entire group. So that means that, does that make sense?
Racism is the ism that we're focusing on for this session. And bringing out the institutional part of racism.
Prejudice based on skin color does not become racism until you add social, political, economic, ideological, and institutional power.
One thing that I don't want you to lose, okay? Don't lose from the individual to the institutional.
Segregation was all made legal in 1896 because an African-American man in Louisiana by the name of Plessy was forced to move from a first-class car in a train to another car in the train where blacks were. He sued Louisiana saying this law was wrong, I had a first-class ticket, I should be able to sit here, and went to the Supreme Court, and the court ruled thus infamously that you could have separate but equal facilities. So now it's constitutional. Once it said this, then everything can be segregated in the South, and not only in the South, but in the North or out here in the West and California too, because once the Supreme Court says something is constitutional, that's it.
Racism isn't in that sense, is not just a black and white issue. You could hate somebody just because you hate somebody for whatever, if they're black or they're Jewish or they're Catholic or whatever. But when the government sets a standard that says it's okay, separate but equal, that institutionalizes it. That makes it okay throughout, and it legally makes it okay.
You studied this with Little Rock. It's in your lesson.
Discrimination, prejudice. We have that in one area, but we have racism supported by the institution in a different area. We're separating the two out.
One of the first questions that comes up is, what about reverse racism? Prejudice hurts no matter who it's directed to. And it's an individual act against individuals. But we're talking about a bigger body of power.
Brown versus Board of Education. In that decision, Thurgood Marshall argued that separate was not equal. The court agreed, and the court then in Brown versus Board of Education said, dismantle the separate but equal education, so now students of color can go to school with white kids. And it didn't happen. Because even though the Supreme Court said that, people said, no one's going to come to my local community, no one's going to come in my town and tell me that my clean little white girl is going to go to school with these Negroes.
In 1957, 9 black students volunteered to go to high school here. This is one of them. Her name is Elizabeth Eckford. She's our guest speaker.
She came to school expecting to meet up with the other children. She walks in and she sees a group of whites, and they see her coming and they begin to taunt and harass her. And so she also sees some military men holding rifles and helmets, and she said, oh good, I can go to these men, they'll help me.
She was directed by some National Guard. They probably just did the, go this way, and she thinks, oh, okay, they're directing me to where I should go. So she starts heading that way and basically sending her to this mob.
And that's when she discovered that they were there with the rifles and bayonets to keep her out.
Excuse me? She's 15 years old. She's a sophomore, 5'3". You're not letting her in? As she's walking down the street, the mob sees her, and 150 people run up behind her. They are screaming at her, cussing at her, spitting on her, calling her racial names. You know what some adult said to this 15-year-old child? Let's take her over to this tree and let's hang her. Ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth made it home. She made it to the bus stop, and then she made it home. When she went home, she took off that dress. She made that dress for her first day of school. Felt so proud, she made her own dress. She never wore that dress again. Why? She said when she took it off, there were spit marks all over her. If somebody had helped her, raise your hand if you think her life would have been different if somebody would have helped her. Nobody did. Ladies and gentlemen, are you going to be silent when you go home? Are you going to be silent?
Imagine a girl, a timid 15-year-old girl who doesn't like to talk, or very quiet, and being thrust in this position of having this angry mob who virtually lynch her because she was breaking this barrier that had been there since the beginning of this country. You know, African Americans were first brought in bondage to this country in 1619. So now we're at 1957. You know, it's over 300 years later, and she and these other young people were breaking that down. And she's a living proof of somebody who had to go through this for this country to change, and now she's here tonight. And it's a great honor for us.
Often children have a sense of innocence, thinking that things are going to eventually turn out right. Imagine what this young lady had to go through when she realized that so many people hated her for something she had no control over. We can't control our race or ethnicity.
What would I do if my daughter came home after being put through such punishment? I mean, as a father, I would say, no, you're not going back to school. You're not going to that school. We're just going to live in the status quo.
We're just going into Central High here, and we've got some bad news. Elizabeth Eckford is not going to be with us today. She was in the emergency room last night, so she's going to have to cancel out on us, which is a real disappointment for the kids because they know about her life and everything she's been through. She wears that pain in her heart right on her sleeve. It's apparent. So, anyway.
Totally bummed. Totally bummed. Totally bummed.
Please, Jean, how long did you stay here at Central High?
I attended Central High School for approximately 6 months, from September of '57 until February of '58. In February, I was expelled for using 2 words, white trash. And believe it or not, those words are dynamite in the South, especially when said by a Negro.
Little Rock is about the first real public instance of African American students going into an all-white school.
We have 10 kids who were selected, and 9 of them decided to go. The black kids who wanted to go to Central High School knew there was going to be some taunting, but I'm not sure that they were ever able to fathom what was going to happen.
Governor Orville Faubus refused to allow the students into the school. He first used the National Guard to keep them out in the fall of 1957. They tried to get in again after the president, Dwight Eisenhower, who's enforcing the law, called up the governor and said, you got to let them into school, get the National Guard out of there. So he sort of just put a handful of cops around the school. The mob went crazy. They had to leave the school again.
And of course, as we know, Eisenhower has to, put the state troops under federal control. He sends in the 101 Airborne in there. It's ridiculous. She went through the same abuses as everybody else went through. The taunting, the verbal abuse, the physical abuse, the tax on the seat. I heard stories of they would break bottles and then, as they were walking by, trip them, and so they'd fall on the broken glass. I mean, just horrible things going into the classes and being taunted and constantly spit on.
The thing about Minnie Jean is she is about, I'd say she's about 5'9" or something like that. And she's a very proud woman. She's very tough. And the students hated her the most at Central High in Little Rock because she acted like she belonged there. She refused to hang her head. She was in the glee club. She sang in chorus. She sang. She wanted to be a part of it. She would not be denied. And therefore, in her being so confident, they just hated her that much more because she would not back down.
When you watch the footage on Little Rock, there are people who are your age. All the governor had to do was say, I don't like this any more than anybody else, but we're going to go along with it and see what happens. Instead, he said, okay, everybody who's a rabble-rouser, come on, get in front of the school. You have my permission. He gave permission for the behavior that happened in front of Central High School. He gave permission to the young people to treat us the way they did.
Minnie Jean, sort of infamously, as far as the Little Rock Nine goes, she was thrown out of the school because she called another student white trash. I think the sort of myth about her is she threw chili on people.
You know, the stories are conflicted of what happened, that there was a gentleman behind her in the food line and he taunted her and she finally poured a bowl of chili on his head. If that's true or not, you know, it's conflicting stories, but...
She said that she did not do that she simply dropped her tray and it splashed on him.
She accidentally dropped her tray on purpose.
Being the strong woman that she is, I think could only take so much.
And they threw her out of the school.
For standing up for herself.
She was disciplined for that. He was also disciplined for that.
And the gentleman, of course, being a white gentleman in a southern town, proceeds to go to school.
There's never been the same treatment between blacks and whites for the same offenses. That's common in our country.
Living in a segregated society is like standing behind a chain link fence with your hands gripped onto the links and looking into this life that you can't take part in. We know what it feels like even to this day. We have enclaves based on class, based on color, based on ethnicity, but what we don't have is the legal, we don't have the laws that say you are relegated here, the Jim Crow laws. So the civil rights movement was about dismantling those laws and practices and beliefs that were so embedded in our thinking, our being, and our acting, both north and south. Because I was expelled, I was so ashamed for all those years. I somehow thought that it was my fault. And I think that's a perfect example of how we're made to feel when we oppose something that is basically wrong and evil. But I remember a feeling, this strong, strong, strong feeling that has stayed with me, is I don't ever want this to happen to anybody else for any reason. It triggers memory, even though I've seen it over and over and over. And there's a real sadness about the things that happen. Some real sadness, personal, and some sadness we should all feel. And there's a lot of shame for me and a lot of anger. So it's all happening at the same time. So there have been really good examples of people trying to work together over time. But it's very dangerous. I had one person who would sometimes walk with me in the hall. So she got death threats and ostracized, and she broke the rules. So she was punished. So anybody who actually tried to be friendly was punished by their friends, by their families, by the community as a whole.
When they go home, are they going to be silent? Or will they take a stand because it's right? Elie Wiesel, famous Holocaust survivor, said it wasn't the people who are the most evil who caused it to happen. It was the people who did nothing. It was indifference. One of our goals of this trip is students aren't silent witnesses, that they will take a stand because it's the right thing to do, and they will not be indifferent. And Central High School, the courtyard, is the perfect place to write about it. This is their testimonial to not being silent witnesses.
Now, quick little history lesson. We become a country in 1776. We say all men are created equal. Women get the right to vote in 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. When do black men, Latino men, Asian men, Indian men, Fijian men, Pacific Islander men, Puerto Rican men, Filipino men, Sri Lankan men, Afghani men, Pakistani men, Middle Eastern men. When do men of color get the right to vote? 1870, 50 years before women with the 15th Amendment. So by 1920, when women get the right to vote, everyone can vote if you're of age, right? Not in the Deep South.
During Reconstruction, 1865, 1877, we had blacks acquiring wealth. We had some semblance of economic power. And what happened? 1866, the Ku Klux Klan, Pulaski, Tennessee, formed this group to prevent blacks from accumulating wealth, accumulating power. If you were trying to vote, God forbid, if you were trying to exercise your right to vote in this country, you could be lynched.
If you wanted to vote, you'd have to walk up these stairs in Selma, Alabama, go to the courthouse. By the way, you see how ugly green that is? It was ugly green in 1965, it's ugly green today. You'd walk up those stairs and you'd see someone who looks like me. And you know what I'd say to a white person? Go ahead, please, enter and register. Person of color would walk up those stairs and I'd say, stop. Why? Prove to me you can read and you can write. Excuse me? This gentleman comes in, he's the next degree up, he has his master's. You know if they ask somebody that had a master's? How many grains of sand in my hand? You know if they ask somebody who was a PhD, had their doctorate? How many jelly beans in a jar? Ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker, John Lewis, who's in the white coat, said no more. May I introduce him first? He's leading a march across this bridge. 600 people are walking across this bridge. There's women and children with him. The date of the march is March 7, 1965. Ladies and gentlemen, notice these men right here, called state troopers. They stop John Lewis. They say, stop, turn your group around, or we're going to beat the hell out of you and your group. John Lewis says we're Americans. We have the right to vote. We're nonviolent. We're not turning around. The trooper said attack. And attack they did. It's a picture of John Lewis being struck over the head by the trooper's nightstick. Trooper came up to him a second time, hit him as hard as he could over the head. You've all bumped your head, you know what that feels like? His hit so hard on the head, it cracked his skull. Ladies and gentlemen, we crossed that same bridge. We march to where they are beaten and make a promise that when we turn 18, we will register to vote because voting is power. He tells our young people there's some good things to be arrested for. Go make trouble. Make good trouble. Does anybody know what John Lewis does for a living today? He's a member of the United States Congress. He represents the state of Georgia. He's beaten bloody many times, always nonviolent. You know what his nickname is in Congress? My favorite nickname. They call him the conscience of Congress. And Lord knows they need a conscience, don't they?
In Selma, Alabama, in 1965, only 2.1% of blacks of voting age were registered to vote. We made a decision, the movement did, that we will march from Selma to Montgomery to dramatize to the nation and to the world that people of color wanted to register to vote. Sunday, March 7th, after attending church, about 600 of us gathered outside of the church on a playground, participated in a nonviolent workshop, and then we lined up in twos to walk in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion from Selma to Montgomery. We slowly walked through the streets of Selma. We came close to the edge of the bridge, crossing the Alabama River, and we continued to walk. We came to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers, and we continued to walk. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers, and a man identified himself and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church." In less than a minute and a half, Major John Cloud said, "Troopers, advance." And you saw these men putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, bullwhips, trampling us with horses, releasing their tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. Had a concussion there at the bridge. I thought I was going to die. Thought I saw death. And the next thing I knew, I had been admitted to the Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma. Early that Monday morning, the next day, Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy came by to see me, and Dr. King said, "Don't worry, John. We will make it from Selma to Montgomery, and the Voting Rights Act will be passed." He issued a call that Tuesday, 2 days later, March 9th, for religious leaders to come to Selma. More than 1,000 priests, rabbis, nuns, and ministers came to Selma and marched to the point where we had been beaten 2 days early.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to put down 15 pearls of wisdom that Dr. Reverend Olson's going to give you. You're going to write down 3 quotes, and I know you're going to make him feel welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, he put himself on the line to make this country better. We're going to thank him today. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand, Dr. Clark Olson. Woo!
Clark Olson was one of these folks who came to Selma for the Second March. And he was a Unitarian minister, and he met other Unitarians that he knew, one of them being Reverend James Reeb.
He was right there when Jim Reeb died, you know. He was, holding, he was holding his friend in his arms and stuff. It's really, really hard to, like, try and picture that whole situation.
The very moment it happened, that is when the 3 guys came across the street at us and swung a club at us, it all happened so quickly that I had scarcely time to, I won't say I didn't have time to be afraid, because I was afraid, but I didn't think about it much at that time. It just happened, and it was all over in maybe 30 seconds or something. But I looked around and saw Orloff Miller, whom I had known before better than Jim Reeb, whom I also saw, but I knew who he was. And the 3 of us happened to group up together and say, yeah, let's go off to dinner.
They had eaten dinner and were just passing the Silver Moon Cafe, and they were attacked by local racist ruffians there in town. And Reeb was hit with a bat or a club in the side of the head and had his skull fractured.
And then we saw these 3 men coming at us from across the street, and one of them carrying a club of some kind. Orloff and Jim and I whispered to each other, basically at first, "Oh my God," and then second, "What do we do?" They said, "Just keep walking. Don't pay any attention to them. Just keep walking." So the fellas came at us, we kept walking, they then came up behind us. I turned and I saw this fellow swing the club. As you can see, I can still have some emotions about it.
It took a long time for the ambulance to get there, and the ambulance got a flat tire halfway. And when they finally did get to the Birmingham hospital, they wouldn't admit him, so they had to go to a different hospital.
The next morning, there were yellow roses from President and Mrs. Johnson. And President Johnson had sent a presidential plane to bring Mrs. Reeb and his father to be with Jim, as in fact he was dying. And to make that story shorter, Jim died within 36 hours or so. There were 20,000 people who came to a memorial service for Jim Reeb in Boston Commons. I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but thousands of people in Chicago and San Francisco and Washington when Jim Reeb died, and there were memorial services. So it had enraged the whole country. The following Monday, Johnson decided he would address Congress to urge Congress to pass the voting rights bill.
Finally, we got an injunction against Governor Wallace, Sheriff Clark, and other officials. And 2 weeks later, we set out on the march from Selma to Montgomery. When we arrived in Montgomery, there were more than 25,000 people there in support of the Voting Rights Act. The Congress debated the act, passed the act, and it was signed into law on August 6, 1965.
It was the death of James Reeb, a white preacher that forced President Johnson's hand.
Well, the main criticism was, it took a white guy to die in order for President Johnson to take action on this whole civil rights, equal voting rights thing.
I was a part of something that became immensely important, and for that I'm terribly grateful. I do find some satisfaction out of the tragedy, that a lot of good happened. I do not find satisfaction in having had to accompany a man who died and left 3 children and left a widow. But sometimes life gives you these things. Thank you very much.
The people, a small group of people, actually forced the president, the leader, to force change. I mean, that just never happens.
You have to look at these people as almost like the forefathers, as they came out and they fought a revolution for representation, to speak their own minds. The same thing happened in the 60s. I see it as the second American Revolution.
Having the 2 drivers we have, Joseph and Johnny, they're family. They're not just bus drivers, they are family. And having these incredible guys who understand what this is about, they are part of our protectors. They look out for us, they are our protectors. They go over and beyond the job, and they add to the safety of the trip. I mean, these guys are family, plus they've lived it. Joseph from Birmingham's lived it, Johnny has lived through the era, and they both love kids. So for me, they're wonderful. I think there's levity throughout this trip. I think there's levity throughout it. And the subject is deep. The subject is tough. But I think there are wonderful moments of levity throughout that kids also make on their own. They're much more resilient than we think.
At one time, Birmingham was nicknamed Bombingham because so many churches have been bombed in that city.
It's 1963. It was the most segregated city in the South. Bull Connor being the most infamous, horrible racist segregationist, always challenged for years by the insanely brave Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who had his own house blown up.
Fred Shuttlesworth was one of the first people to test the law in Alabama about integration.
There's this great footage of him taking his kids to a school, a segregated school in the late 50s, and being attacked by, I'm going to say maybe 8 to 10 Klansmen with chains and brass knuckles and just pummeling him, and he's just trying to go through them, and they just attacked him. I mean, he's just completely fearless.
Reverend Shuttlesworth said he thought long ago he'd be dead by 40. And what is he, 85 or?
People say to me, well, it's a pleasure to meet you. I said, but it's more of a pleasure for me to be here. Because in '56, the Klan tried to blow me into heaven. They couldn't. They tried to mob me the next year. They couldn't. They've done other things.
There was like, I don't know, 16 sticks of dynamite below his head. They exploded, blew up. The whole house fell down around him, but he did not get a scratch on him.
But I come through all of that and didn't get a scratch. The mattress was torn. The springs underneath my mattress was blown away. I tell you the truth, I have never felt as calm and cool and happy and satisfied as I was the time that bomb was exploding. So when I sing My Heavenly Father Watches Over Me, I'm saying the real stuff. I know He cares for me. On the mountain peak or on the stormy deep, though billows roll, He keeps my little soul. My Heavenly Father watches over me. That's it. And so I challenge these students. I talk to them more today about it, and I speak to all of them about it. Your job is to point a better way. We got to begin getting rid of the violence, because we don't even deal with that now. We got to begin getting rid of the meanness that is our tendency now is to just act mean when we don't have to. And if we could learn to just be our better selves, maybe not our best, but the better selves than we are.
After studying you, I remember thinking of a quote by Nelson Mandela, and I don't think I have the exact words, but he said, "We are made to make manifest the glory of God within us, and as we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates the fears in others." And I feel that because of that, you are an incredible hero. Not only were you able to liberate yourself from your own fears and follow your path and the design of God and never question it, but you are able to garner the focuses of others in Birmingham and be such a profound leader that people just were compelled to follow you. And I can only hope that one day I can have a fraction of the courage and heroism that you exhibited throughout the 60s and today.
The reason why I started doing the Give Back was Minnie Jean said to me, for 30 years, people in the movement never heard how they affected America in a positive way. Now, students write letters, but it takes time to get the letters and to read them. To get this immediately, I think, is cathartic for our speakers.
what he did, if he hadn't taken the stand that he had, Birmingham probably today would not be what it is. He never got the recognition that he deserved. That's point blank.
When I'm watching a speaker, and I'm watching, also remembering them when they were young and vibrant, and the hope that we all had when we were young about what we could do and how things would change permanently and it would be a better place. And then sort of to be here, and it is somewhat a better place, but it's nothing like we thought it might be.
You can answer the question yourself. Is the country one today? Is it? Well, think about it. And if it isn't one, why? And what will it take to make it become one, since so many people have been trying to unite the country?
Dr. King came in '63. They got junior high and high school kids to be arrested. Hundreds of them went to jail. They won. And then President Kennedy began to push for a Civil Rights Act in 1963, and the retaliation was to plant bombs in the 16th Street Baptist Church.
What happened on September 15th? You had 4 little girls who were in, I think they call it the basement of the church. They were in the dressing rooms or the areas of the church preparing for Sunday school. Denise McNair was 11 years old. She was the youngest of the 4. There was a phone call. All the person said was 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, huge explosion, and 4 little girls were killed. Many people were injured. This incident rocked the country because in America, the church was seen as a sanctity, as a place away from the horrors of sometimes a brutal life. So here was the place that people went for family and for empowerment. And these young girls were not there for any political activity. They weren't politicians, they weren't civil rights activists. They were 4 innocent little girls. And so here, some group of people who so hated blacks and so desired to intimidate them that they set a bomb in a church. And I remember talking to Lisa McNair on my first trip. Lisa McNair is the younger sister of Denise McNair. Lisa wasn't born when Denise was killed. And I remember saying, Lisa, where was your sister killed? And Lisa walked with me and she pointed to the area which was the dressing room, and she says, I think it was right there.
One of them was around my age at the time I went on the trip, and the others were just a few years younger. And the fact that we just walked by and saw these were where they spent their last moments before they were killed it was really sad, because, I mean, this happened just around 40 years ago, and this was where they had been living and breathing and moving, and then in a split second all of that vanished because of just a sort of hatred that is just an ugly hatred.
2 or 3 of those guys had escaped prosecution in prison, even though they're incredibly old now, but they have since, in just the last 5 years, prosecuted them and put them in prison for that horrible thing they did.
What had killed their daughter was a piece of a stone that had lodged in her head. And they still have that piece of stone. And she was such a beautiful young girl. I mean, every time I see her, when I was on the trip, all I could see was my daughter's face. And it killed me.
I know that my parents really enjoy sharing with the kids their experience. I think it's an opportunity for them to get their story told. I think it helps for them to reach out to the younger people of America. I think it means a lot to them.
That was like the it point for me. After taking so much in, and learning about it, it reached the point where it started to relate to my life. And that's when I kind of broke down. After the tears came out, I felt kind of better. Kind of like a confession, I guess. You know, asking for forgiveness or whatever, for like after all the things that I've done and said and whatever, everything that I regretted prior to the trip that I've done.
You could not challenge the status quo without the fear of losing your life. You know the Ku Klux Klan had codes, and one code would say that if you were doing something that the Ku Klux Klan didn't like, they would call and intimidate you. Another code would say, okay, they burn a cross on your lawn. Another code would say they beat you up, and another code, they would kill you. Jeff Steinberg, the fact how we got started with Soldier into the Past, he found out that white supremacists were planning to kill his brother. There was some information found that indicated that they were planning to attack him, and Jeff went into the classroom and talked with his young people and asked them questions about civil rights, and his students knew nothing. And Jeff knew that there was a huge disconnect in the understanding of history. And so that was the genesis of this trip. The Ku Klux Klan is not an organization that has ever gone away. Sometimes they go into hiding. They no longer wear robes. At least they no longer wear Ku Klux Klan robes. They sometimes wear judges' robes. They're sometimes wearing business suits.
Okay. We should be good. The politician who's put on a list to be murdered is my brother. That is my older brother. His name is Daryl. Daryl is 2.5 years older than I am. He's my best friend. We are as close as brothers can be. I'm, of course, a better athlete than he is, but don't know younger brothers say that. My brother was elected to the state legislature. He's a state lawmaker in Sacramento. In 2000, 3 synagogues were firebombed in Sacramento. When the FBI did a search warrant, the FBI found a list of 30 names that these men were targeting to murder. On top of their list was my brother Daryl. They said, shut your blinds and windows at night. Why? He had young children. We're afraid someone's going to shoot your children through your windows. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing has happened to my brother yet, thank goodness. Why do I share this with you? Because it's pretty painful for my family to go through. It wasn't Mississippi. It wasn't Alabama. It wasn't the 1960s. Sacramento, 5 years ago, what I would call our backyard.
Got it.
Would you make sure I get all the, well, we know you, but I just need to make sure I'm trying to not to leave anybody out. Yeah, we're great. Thank you for all your help. I just know from my own background, too, as a Jewish person, all the hatred that's out there. Anti-Semitism runs rampant. I feel it and hear it a lot. Personally and societally, I feel it. I don't think going into San Francisco and looking at the travails there, which there are, or the travails in Oakland or in East Palo Alto, I don't think people get it. So to take them out of their environment, place them where we have wonderful footage, incredible people who want to share their stories, then see the transformation. Then when they come home, ask them, what are you going to do now in your own homeschooler community?
In 1966, a man named Vernon Dahmer Sr. went on the radio to encourage people to come out to his grocery store to register to vote. It would be a safe environment for them.
There was this tax imposed on African Americans that you had to pay a certain poll tax, which was illegal but was allowed through state rights. And he said, I will pay your poll tax. Come and vote, I will pay it.
Vernon Dahmer in Mississippi was president of the local NAACP, and he strongly believed in the power of the vote. His motto was, if you don't vote, you don't count. Because of his activities, Vernon Dahmer was targeted by the Ku Klux Klan for murder. So that night that he went on the radio, the family was asleep and a couple cars pulled over in front of the Dahmer house. And he and his wife, Betty, would sleep in shifts. She would sit up at night and watch for the Ku Klux Klan while he would sleep, or he would sit up at night and watch for the Ku Klux Klan while she would sleep. And they came out with guns and bombs. They firebombed the house. And Vernon's wife and children got out through the back of the house. Vernon Sr. stayed back to defend the house and to protect the family, give his family enough time to get out of the house. And by doing that, by the time the Klan members left, he inhaled too much smoke, and when he got to the hospital, he died a couple of hours later. Vernon Dahmer's 4 sons were all in the military. And there's a striking scene where his sons come home from the military to look at their burned out home, burned by racists because his father wanted everyone to participate in the American political process.
A while later, the man called Vernon Dahmer and told him that he knew a lot of details about what had happened that night. And so Vernon Dahmer, of course, was very shocked. And he kept up this phone conversation with the man, and eventually they ended up meeting. And
story gets stranger. Dahmers are walking out of the courtroom in '98. Someone stops him and says, "Can I speak to you?" Dahmers stop. The person who stops them is the killer, Billy Roy Pitts. Dahmers say, "What do you want?" And Billy Roy Pitts starts crying and says, "I'd like to apologize. I'd like to apologize for murdering your father 32 years ago. Could you ever forgive me?" How many of us sitting here could forgive the man who murdered our father 32 years later?
Several of them just watched their father die like in front of their eyes, and I don't know if I could ever forgive anyone for taking away my father. The Dahmer family, just unbelievable. Able to forgive, not forget.
He said, if I had to do it, he says, I wouldn't do it. Will you forgive me? Well, being raised in the kind of home with the kind of family that I have, if I'm a Christian and you admit that you did something wrong, and you ask me to forgive you, what am I supposed to do? Tell you no? No. That puts me at your level. I ain't going there. So yes, I can do that. Hate destroys the hater. I'm gonna do that. Now, life is too short, life is too beautiful to run it.
Hate, what does hate do? I think that's a great quote that you should be writing down. Hate destroys the hater.
He was able to, I guess, uplift his father's memory even more so by forgiving the man, because when he was talking, he talked a lot about how his father was a very selfless person and he would help blacks and whites alike.
Well, I love Vernon Damer. I love Vernon Damer. If you don't vote, you don't count. Your voice has to be heard. People's lives have been taken. Note what I'm saying here. I'm not saying their lives, they gave their lives, because I don't think people wanted to die. I know nobody wanted to die. Lives were taken way too early, way too early. And many lives were taken for the right to vote. Well, if that doesn't inspire you to get out there and say, my voice is going to be heard, I'm not sure what will.
They're standing by their father's gravestone and discussing the situation. And then the best thing is they bring out voter registration cards and have you must vote. To this day, they're still about registering to vote and voting.
The struggle, segregation, discrimination, coming out of slavery, and the problems that we've had being accepted into the total society as first-class citizens, particularly here in the South, is not documented in the history books as far as I've seen. If we want the total population of this nation to understand what has happened during all these years of oppression of a particular race of folks, primarily black folks, then it should be documented. Don't hide this history. Bring it out. Teach it in the classrooms, because white America needs to know about the struggle that the black Americans went through during all these years and the tragedies that we suffered.
At this point on the trip, we're on the downhill side of it, but we slow down the work a little bit. We're heading from Hattiesburg to Jackson. I'm looking forward to going to Jackson because we're going to meet Jerry Mitchell, who was the journalist that exposed the Sovereignty Commission, which is something I, as a history teacher, knew nothing about until I came on this trip. And to have a sort of a police state in the United States, not unlike Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, is quite shocking.
Today you get to meet what I like to say, one of the good guys. Ladies and gentlemen, the best civil rights reporter in America, Mr. Jerry Mitchell.
In a sense, Mississippi was a police state in the 50s and the 60s. The authorities, the state authorities, kept information on people in Mississippi who were involved with the civil rights movement. And they would often feed information to the Ku Klux Klan. And there was literally like 100,000 pages or files in the state capitol in Mississippi. And he is still at this time going through it. So he's been able to help in exposing Medgar Evers' murderer, Cheney, Goodwin, and Schwerner. Vernon Dahmer is another person. Through Jerry Mitchell's work, they were able to take all this information and nail these guys in the Klan that killed people in the 50s and the 60s. And I would say we're still going to learn more about all these cases, and it's through Jerry Mitchell's work. He's a brave guy.
Some people describe me as a crusading reporter, and that's fine. If people want to say that, that's fine. But I'm not an activist. I'm trying to be a journalist. I'm trying to record this. And once you kind of step over that line and become an activist, you really can't be a journalist anymore. So I really view my role as just recording all this. It's, you know, being an eyewitness to all these incredible cases.
As you well know, it all kind of started with the Medgar Evers case. And Medgar Evers was killed, which you probably have heard or realized by now, is Medgar Evers was killed here in Jackson in June 12, 1963, shot in the driveway of his own home.
Driver's side faced an open alleyway there, so it was an easy target. So he got out the driver's side, which was this, and it faced the side of the house. There's nowhere for anyone to hide. He stepped out of the car. He was carrying t-shirts that said, "Jim Crow must go," and a gunshot rang out from over there. The bullet went through Medgar's back. It went through his chest. That same bullet went through this window right here. His children, they came running for the front door. Murley came running for the front door. Medgar, being the strong man that he was, had his keys in his hands. He crawled up the driveway here and passed out right on the stairs. His 9-year-old daughter, Rena, opened the door, saw her father lying in his own blood, and started crying and said, "Get up, Daddy. Daddy, please get up. Daddy, get up. Please get up." They put him in a car, and they left. He died an hour later.
There was a murder weapon that was found not too far from where Medgar was killed in Honeysuckle Bush, and it belonged to Byron Dale Beckwith. He was tried twice in '64, but 2 all-white juries basically deadlocked him, and he was free.
You have kind of injustice at its height. Like, everybody knows this guy is guilty, but yet he's walking away from it.
Fast forward now to 1989, I was here at the paper and I did a story that basically showed that the state of Mississippi secretly assisted Byron Dale Beckwith's defense, which nobody knew at the time. And that was in the Sovereignty Commission records.
The Sovereignty Commission included judges, lawyers, and professional businessmen. Their job was to destroy any group or any person who was trying to upset the status quo.
There was no evidence, no murder weapon, no transcript, nothing. But Murley Evers believed, and she prayed, and some amazing things happened.
Since 1989, there have been 22 different killings from the civil rights era that have been re-examined by authorities. There have been 26 arrests and 21 convictions, 2 acquittals and 1 mistrial. And it all started here in Jackson. And a bunch of these cases are up north, by the way, so don't just think this is a southern thing. May God bless you on your own journey of redemption. Thanks a lot, guys. King Solomon once said, where there is justice, there is joy. And I mean, those are the kind of words that resonate for me. I mean, you know, to see the joy on people's faces like Murley Evers after Byron Dale Beckwith was convicted after all those years. To see the Dahmer family after Sam Bowers was convicted after all those years. I mean, it's something, you know, lots of people involved in this. And so, you know, I just don't view it as me. I don't. I mean, a good picture of how I think of this is I'm at the very top of a very tall mountain, and there's a little snowball that starts. And then by the time it gets to the bottom of the mountain, it's an avalanche.
The night before we go home, I get our students away from the emotions, and I take them out on Beale Street in Memphis, Tennessee. We get away from the emotions and some of the finest music in the country. I'll use their language. I take them out clubbing. And ladies and gentlemen, as we go to this club right here, take a look at what they do. They are able to eat incredible barbecue, Southern style. They are able to dance. Look at our students dancing. There's Minnie Jean dancing with them. I think many people think they're in for a tour. I never call this a tour, ever. I call it, when they come home, I think they realize they've been on a journey, and it's a journey of the soul. Somebody said to me, this trip was like soul candy. I think when they come home, they are empowered. They're empowered to say, I know I can make a difference. I know I can. And I think therein lies the victory.
Not once upon a time fairy tale stuff. What you saw on this trip is real. Miss McNair's sister is real. That bombing of that church, that's real. That wasn't once upon a time fairy tale. Minnie Jean Brown is real. That ain't no fairy tale. Going through all that hell to go to school. Not in Zimbabwe, not in South Africa, not in Bosnia, in America, USA. This is not fairy tale once upon a time. This is in my lifetime. All those lives that were lost and all the horror that was put upon us, and we don't deal with it that much because what happens is it's painful for black people and shameful for white people, so we just kind of put it under the rug and don't deal with it. The only way healing can take place is to take it from under the rug and put it on the table and deal with it. I never really understood, Jeff, why the graveyards had to be segregated, because dead people don't bother each other. They just get along.
Reverend Kyles was on the balcony with Dr. King when he was shot. He spent the last hour with Dr. King. He talks about dreaming and dreaming big. He talks about the power of a dream. It's the perfect speaker to end this trip, because if this trip's all about hope, then dreaming big about the change you can make in your community, your school, your home, your life, your family is part of the dream.
Dinner was to be served at my home on April 4th. I told him dinner was at 5 o'clock. He called the house. They told him dinner was at 6. So when I came here to the motel to get him at 5, I knocked on the door at the room 306. And he said, dinner is not until 6, and I am in no hurry. That gave me the wonderful privilege to spend the last hour of his life with him. 3 preachers in a room, Abernathy, King, and Kiles. And of the 3, I am the only one left. About 5:45, we walked on the balcony. Ralph was still in the room. Abernathy put him on, he was shaving. Martin and I walked on the balcony. We stood side by side. He was saying hello to people he had not seen. He saw Jesse Jackson and said, Jesse brought a band down. Don't take that whole band to Kyle's house. Jesse said, I'm not taking the band to the house. Then Jesse said to him, I want you to meet Ben Branch, the band leader. So they started walking towards the balcony. We were the only ones on the balcony, Martin and I. Ralph was in the room. Everybody else was on the first level. He started walking toward them. I said, come on, guys, let's go. I got about 5 steps. Kapow! The shot rang out. I looked back and saw that he had been knocked from the railing where that reef is, back on the balcony. I ran to his side. There was a tremendous hole in the side of his face. The bullet was a dum-dum. It doesn't go in straight. It mushrooms, it explodes, and went all down in his chest and tore all of that out. We couldn't see that under his shirt, but there was blood everywhere. And so the picture of people pointing is in response to the police saying, where did the shot come from? I took a spread from one of the beds and covered him from his neck down. He never spoke a word. Someone put a towel to his face. We got someone on the switchboard, and I told Jesse to call Mrs. King, and I called my home. I was doing what needed to be done, but I was just doing it perfunctorily. I was really out of it. I have no words to express what I was feeling or how I was feeling. They finally came and took him to the hospital, and we waited. About an hour or 2 later, they called to say that Martin Luther King Jr. had officially been pronounced dead at the St. Joseph's Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was shot on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. But for many years, I wondered, why was I there? Of all the places he could have been, we were friends, but all the places we could have been, why was I there at that moment in time? There had to be a reason. What was the reason? And it troubled me so. Why was I there? And then, like the unfolding of the flower, I waited, and the revelation came. I was there to be a witness. And my witness has to be true. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't die in some foolish way. He didn't overdose. He wasn't shot by a jealous lover. He wasn't shot leaving the scene of a crime. He was a man with an earned PhD degree at 27, a Nobel Peace Prize, oratorical skills that are off the charts, all the things he could have been. Could have been university president, could have been UN ambassador, all the things he could have been. Yet he died on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee, helping garbage workers. That's why we remember his life 35 years later. He never grew up poor, was never poor in his life. He had a compassion for the poor. And they said, we will shoot this dreamer. And then we will see what happens to his dream. And the witness has come to tell each one of you that the dream is still alive. Thank you very, very much.